Today we are going to jump back into a series on the subject of apologetics. So let's briefly review what we covered in our first section, and then I think we'll be able to handle this session much better. If you recall, a couple of weeks ago, the first major emphasis, the first major point that I was trying to work on and get across was the centrality of faith in what we cannot see. The centrality of faith in what we cannot see. Now, if you recall, I said for the Christian, this is all wrapped up, of course, in Christ and what He's done and the Word of God. And so, for a Christian, when we talk about faith, we're talking about something we personally haven't seen. But the fact of the matter is that there were Christians at some point in time, in the very early days of the church, right, that did see. We're not those, but there were those that were way back when. And what did they see? They saw the Son of God. They saw the Son of God die on a cross. They saw the Son of God buried in the tomb, and they saw the Son of God come out alive on the third day. And because they saw all of that, it changed their lives. They saw it, and it changed their perspective. It changed their goals. It changed what they did, and it changed what they faced. They faced persecution. They faced even death. And they did so, nonetheless, gladly, so that they could bear the testimony of having seen Jesus, having seen what He did. And because they did that, of course, it's come down to us who have to believe on the basis of what we have not seen. Now, there's other things that we can talk about in this realm as well that have to do with God and the creation. We'll get into those over probably not so much this session, but the next time that we talk about the subject matter. But that's the Christian, and that's what faith is to him or to her. Now, I told you, I said last time that we were together, that it was it's my proposition that a non-Christian actually has more faith than a Christian. A non-Christian, and let's say an atheist, let's say an atheist materialist scientist. That person, to believe what they believe, I think they actually have to have more faith than we do. We have faith in something that we have not seen personally, but we have a testimony of someone who did. They have nothing of the sort. They just have to make it up as they go. They have to pull it out of the sky, more or less, and they have to, take a stand on it. They have to be willing to make it the basis upon which they try to make sense of life. For the non-Christian, banking on science, they certainly have got to depend on something they can't see. Now, the vogue in science right now, or what's in vogue in science right now, is, of course, the quantum world. It's all about things that are incredibly small. And so all the hullabaloo of things like cosmic cosmology, or all the things about quantum cosmology, and all the things about string theory, and all the things about quantum loop gravity, and all those other kinds of words and phrases that you might hear bandied about, all of those things are dealing with things that are incredibly small. They're so small there's no way to see them. You're getting down below things that are smaller than basically wavelengths of light, and so there's really no way to see those things. And so in that incredibly small world that can't be seen, discoveries are made, mathematics are worked out, and theories pop out. And it's one thing to have those things and understand how things are made up. It's another thing to deal with causation. It's another thing to come up with an explanation, a reason, some plausible approach to how these things came into existence. So, for a non-Christian, they're dealing with as much faith as a Christian is. For an atheist, they're dealing with as much faith as a Christian is. Their faith is that there's no God and all of this stuff came about by chance and self-assembly. For a Christian, we believe that He who is all-wise, the God above all things, called everything into existence and made it out of His great wisdom. My position is that throughout this series, it's going to be just this, is that I'd rather be in my shoes than in their shoes. I'd rather be facing the challenge of what I have to believe than to face the challenge of what they have to believe. So we talked about the centrality of faith, and secondarily, our second emphasis, the last time that we were together on the subject, was dealing with just the incredible problem that information in living things causes for somebody in particular who does not believe in God. Everything from the simplest, from the simplest bacteria, from the simplest single-cell organism to something as complicated as you or I, something as large as perhaps a blue whale, no matter what it is that's living. And it's not just those of us who are animated, who get about and do things. But this is also true of things like plants and algae and all that other kind of thing, right? Everything that is alive is dependent upon specific information, specific, useful, non-repetitive, encoded information. Let me run by that list of descriptors again. Specific, useful, non-repetitive, encoded information. Now, if you think about all of those words and how they relate to information, what this is basically getting to is just that the kind of order and structure that you can see in nature is not capable of carrying this kind of information. So, for instance, crystals are representative in some respect of information. I mean, you have molecules that are lined up in lattices and that are held together in a certain structure, and sometimes those structures are very resilient to change. They're very reliable through time, but there's nothing specific or functional about those things. Only in Star Trek episodes are there crystalline creatures, right? Not in real life. So these qualities of information create a big problem for the non-Christian. Now, for the Christian, we don't have problems with this kind of information because we believe in an intelligent God. God who is all-wise, God who is intelligent, created all things, and He's the one who put this information into living things that causes them to function and live as they do. But for a non-believer, to come up with something that produces this kind of information, they have an impossible task. We have been around long enough, particularly in the scientific community, and especially since the advent of computers, the whole issues of information science and informatics and everything that goes with it, information theory. These things have over the last several decades gotten well developed, and what all of that science, what all of that research, what all of that understanding points to is just this: the only known source that we have ever come across for this kind of information is intelligence. Nothing else produces this kind of information. The kind of information that every living thing has within its cells, that every living thing has encoded in its DNA, we know of no source for that sort of information other than intelligence. So when you don't believe in God and you don't believe in a supervening intelligence, what do? Well, you're faced with the impossible task of trying to describe something that's impossible. It's an impossible task trying to describe something that doesn't happen and can't happen. And so that's where we basically were in the first session, and hopefully some of that kind of rings a bell, and you heard more or less what I just shared with you, so that we're on the same page. Today, we're going to explore a little bit more the depths of this information and how it's encoded. And in doing so, hopefully put forward enough information that you, looking at information and the problems of it, can see that really the only conclusion that's sensible is God the Creator. Now today our scripture that we are going to basically stand on as a foundation for what we were looking at is this little one out of the book of Proverbs, chapter 25, verse number 2. Listen to what it says there. It is the glory of God to conceal a matter. It is the glory of God to conceal a matter. To search out a matter is the glory of kings. Do you see that? It's a fantastic proverb, and basically what it says to us is just this. God, in His great intelligence, in His great wisdom, has put out into the structure of all things, the creation that we are walking in, that we look at, that we walk through. God has put into creation, hidden in a matter of speaking, the very fabric of His wisdom in making it all be. And so, if we look, if we can, if we're willing, if we look hard enough, God has established things in such a way that we will be able to discover the things that God has done and that were not apparent to us at first. It is the glory of God to conceal the matter. God doesn't come out and tell us how He's done everything. God doesn't come out and say, this is everything that you need to know about biochemistry. This is everything that you need to know about cosmology. This is everything that you need to know about physics. This is everything that you need to know about whatever the case may be. God doesn't come out and just throw that all out there. God stands back and says, okay, kids, see what you can do with this. And I like that about God. He has that characteristic. It's first represented to us in the book of Genesis, where it tells us in chapter 2 of that book that God took Adam after He had created him, and He took him out and showed him all the animals that He created. And the Bible tells us that He had Adam name those animals, and whatever Adam named them, that was their name. And I see there just this loving heart of this creative Father that we have in the heavenlies, who gets a kick out of taking His children, kind of sitting them on their lap and saying, what do you think of that? What do you think of this? And what would you name this? And what would you name that? See, it is the glory of God in creating things the way that He has, to make things that will be interesting to us, things that we can use our noodle on, things that inspire us to go searching and seeking. It is God's glory to do that. God gets a kick out of watching us seeking and searching and looking at all the things that He has made. And it's by the very nature of how He's made us, it is our glory to discover those things. And so, you know, when you look at the history of science and you go back to people like Isaac Newton, who was a devout believer in God, so was Copernicus, so was Kepler, so was Galileo for that matter. When you look at scientists in the past, especially at the beginning of the scientific revolution that came, you know, after the Renaissance and whatnot, those folks were not searching out things to try to disprove God. They were searching out things because they believed in God, and they knew it was God's glory to conceal a thing, but it was the glory of man to discover those things. And so, discovering, they went. And boy, they found so many awesome and exciting things. And to this day, you know, we still are seeing those kinds of discoveries made. Now, I want to show you something. This is a representation of what's going on in every one of your cells right now. Not the only thing that's going on in your cells, but some of them. You can probably figure out that this red curly thing here, that's the double helix of DNA. The various erases, the various enzymes and protein machines are taking the two strands apart and transcribing them and making another DNA chain in the place where there was a split. So you're basically getting ready for mitosis. All right. They're not that. You can see a little detail in this one. Those are basically proteins. Enzymes are a kind of protein, but they're basically proteins. They're all curled up into a certain shape, all folded up. And the shape that they're in allows them to do the things that they're doing. So even though they look like they're just a glob, they're actually very specific, and if they're not just that way, they don't work. And that's about the speed that is going on inside your cell. That's how fast it reads your DNA. I understand it spins, the little machine in there, that little molecular machine, spins faster than a jet engine. There are several of those on YouTube. This one is from a pretty reliable source, a guy named Don Berry. Those things are fascinating. If you get a chance, just go to YouTube, look up various kinds of things. You can look up transcription, you can look up translation, and you'll get different animations that are based on, you know, what our understanding of what the molecules are doing inside of your cells. And it is absolutely wondrous. First time I ever was exposed to any of this kind of stuff was back when I was a freshman in college and took a course on human anatomy. And that doesn't seem all that interesting. It wouldn't have been all that interesting except that we went into the body system by system, organ by organ on a microscopic level, and it was fascinating. And so a lot of fascinating stuff out there, and I encourage you to take a look at it when you can. Now, this is, as I said, just a depiction of some of the wonders, some of those secrets that God has concealed that, you know, to the glory of, we'll call them king scientists, right? To the glory of king scientists, they have uncovered and discovered these kinds of things. Now, how all of this is happening, of course, the thing that's driving everything that you saw up on the screen, everything that's occurring within, particularly the nucleus of the cell, but also in some other places in the cell, is information. Information is the basis upon all the activity of your cell. Now, what that means is not only what your cell does, but also the stuff that your cells are built out of. All of that comes from information. Now, the stuff that your cells are built out of, you can almost think of that information something like maybe a cookbook, right? That you need this ingredient and this ingredient and this ingredient and this ingredient, you know, do some things to it, and out pops a certain substance. Unless you're really bad, then it, you know, might be burnt or it might not rise or whatever it might happen to it. But for the, you know, the physical structures that make up our being, that's very true for. The information is used to make the structures that make up our cells. And cells are incredibly complicated. I mean, you have organs, organelles, you have various kinds of little sites and situations within the cell. You have different kinds of gateways in the cells that open and shut things. Sometimes you have motors inside the cell, like some of the things you saw there. You also have, within the cells, you have just this incredible storage library that we call chromosomes. There you have, each of us has almost 2 meters. In every single cell in our body, there's almost 2 meters as far as the length of DNA goes. Now, you know, imagine all the cells in your body. We're talking trillions. And each one of those cells has like 1.8 meters, something of that nature, length of DNA in each one of those cells. And, you know, you start thinking, where do you put it all? Well, when it's really, really small, right? You can get it into a small place, and all of that library. I mean, there's even little molecular machines in our cells that will take that information and wrap it around a little loop, and then go to the next little section and make another loop of it, and you get loop after loop, and these all bundle together in these nice structures. It's absolutely incredible and amazing. And as I said, if you ever get a chance to watch these things, watch them, because they will fill you with wonder. Now, where did they come about? Where did the information come about for all of this? Well, we know what we use for information. We use the DNA code. Now, the DNA code is basically, we've talked a lot about this over the years as well, but the DNA code is just a molecule that, because of its structure, you can have certain nucleotide bases put into order, and that order is capable of being very reliable, very dependable, and that order is capable of containing information. When you order things, you turn it into information. You can do it with matchsticks, right? You take a matchbox and throw out some sticks on the ground. Do you have any information? Well, you have the information about the stick and, you know, what it was made for and all that kind of stuff, but you really are not passing along any real intelligible information. But if you start making symbols out of those matchsticks, you can actually leave a message for somebody else who, if they understand the code, can decipher and do the appropriate thing as a result. That's kind of what's happening inside of our DNA. You have these A, T's, C's, and G's. Those are the way you abbreviate it for all the chemical names like adenine and thymine and guanine and whatnot. But all of those, there's only 4 of them, but all of those, we'll call them letters, can be used to carry information. They can be ordered in a certain way so they can carry information. Now, that sounds interesting and whatnot, but it's really not where the wonder really begins. The wonder really begins when we realize that proteins and all the various biochemicals that your body uses are made up out of these polymeric chains of amino acids. We call them proteins and enzymes and various other biochemicals, but they're all made out of 20 different amino acids. Now, if you take 4 letters and you're trying to make a code that can be used to actually specify one of 20 amino acids, you can see that you've got a level of complication brought into the process here. When you look at a DNA code, and you always got your combinations 2 by 2 in the actual chain. In other words, A always connects to T, C always connects to G. Of course, when you get to RNA, the T is U is used instead because of a little transition from one chemical to another, a little adjustment to thymine that occurs when it gets translated to RNA. But let's put that aside. When you look at that combination of things, you only have 4 letters. Now, if you only had 4 letters in the alphabet, how much could you communicate? Not that much, right? I mean, you only have 4 letters. I mean, you could probably make some kind of shorthand and go a long way to producing a lot of things. Could you write Shakespeare's plays? Most of you would say, I wouldn't want to. Could you write a solid definition of a word that somebody could read and actually understand very well what that word meant and what are the various nuances of meaning and whatnot? Probably not. I mean, there's a limit to what shorthand can do. But somehow or another, those 4 letters, those 4 information-bearing molecules, if you will, or molecules that are used to bear information, have got to tell the cell what to do with 20 different amino acids in order to make all the things that living cells use. 4 little letters have to have a code that can tell a cell, any living cell, whether it's plant or animal or anything in between, maybe we could say, any living thing has got to be able to take those 4 letters and somehow or another have a code that will allow that cell to know which amino acids to put in what place to make all the things that living things make. Now, the thing that's fascinating about that is that when you talk to an atheist scientist about this kind of thing, their only explanation for where this kind of stuff arises is chance. It's all you have. If you don't believe in God, if you don't believe even in some aspect of God, some kind of supervening intelligence, if you don't believe in that, really the only other game in town is chance. And so when you look at that, then you start applying the mathematics of probability, because that's what you do with chance. You discover very quickly that the odds against coming up with things that are so specific, so reliably the same and specific and usable and encoded, the odds against those things are so ridiculously small as to basically practically be impossible. Now, scientists will never say that. Scientists will never say anything's impossible, even if the odds in it are 1 in 80 gazillion, billion, million, trillion, a bunch of zeros after, because they're still, it's like, Dumb and Dumber. There's still a chance. But, when does a chance become so small that it's ridiculous even to rely upon it? We're talking about 10 raised to over the 100th power. These are the level of the odds against putting things together in this kind of way. And then when you start talking about, you have to have something, not only put together things in order that can bear information for a specific thing, but then, because information doesn't do you any good if it's just sitting on the page. Right? If you have an instruction manual, does it do any good if it's in that instruction manual sitting on a bookshelf and it's not opened? The only way it becomes usable is if there's some kind of a mechanism to look at it, understand what it's saying, and do something. Right? I mean, you get nowhere if you don't have that. And so there's a whole process that involves all kinds of micro machines, miniature little proteins, miniature little enzymes that do things with that information. And the things that they do with that information is what allows all the living things that use such information to do all the things that they do. Are you still with me? Am I making any sense at all?
Yeah.
Okay. So what is the basic process? And this is the same in all living things. They use a combination of 3 of those letters. They call it a codon. And so you take 3 of the 4 possible base pairs, and in a unit called codon, those 3 things are a code for a specific amino acid. Right? If you think about the mathematics of this, if you have 4 letters to choose from, you can have a combination of those 4 things in 3 letters. In other words, you have 4 possibilities that you can choose from, and all of those possibilities have to have 3 of the letters together. It gives you something in the order of 64 possibilities. So when you look at codons, there are 64 possible triplets, possible codons, that can help the cell take information in the DNA and actually use it. Right? Now, those codons have a code, and they're always the same, and they're almost the same across different species. Now, some different animals will use different combinations than others, or certain life forms will use different forms than others, but by and large, just about all of them are used very commonly, even across species barriers. So, this is common to virtually all living things. Well, it is common to all living things, it's just that sometimes there are some differences in how one living thing will use code as opposed to another. But the principle is the same. Now, the thing that is most amazing about this, I think, is that there has been no basis discovered to this point in time. We say, well, maybe we'll discover it sometime, and that's a possibility. But at this point in time, despite everything that's been thrown at it, we have no idea why the convention exists. There's nothing chemical that jumps off the page and says that if you have this triplet, these 3 letters, let's say this one is A, and G. That'll code for a certain amino acid. We have no idea why A, and G means that. We only know that it does. So when you look into why codons actually point to the amino acid that they do, all that we can say is, well, we don't know, they just do. There's been no discovery up to this point in time as to why it has to be that way. It doesn't seem like it has to. In fact, believe it or not, because there is that repetition, we have 64 combinations that are possible. You only have 20 amino acids that you have to code for. What is up with the other 43? Well, 3 of them are used for stop codons, which are just a way to tell the machinery of the cell, stop making protein, right here. But the other 60 are used, and some of them are used more than once. In fact, there are a couple of amino acids that have up to like 6 different combinations that will code for that. Whereas other amino acids, only 1 codon codes for that. There doesn't seem to be rhyme or reason, chemically, physically, anything at all that's ever been discovered to understand why your cell knows to take those 3 things and always interpret that as calling for this particular amino acid. It just does. Now, I said that there is no necessity in this information system. There really isn't. There's no chemical reason for self-assembly in a DNA chain. There's no chemical reason for particular nucleotide bases to be put into the order that they are in any DNA chain. There is some spatial reasons for the hydrogen bonds to hook up the way that they do between one strand of DNA and the other. But other than that, I mean, there is like nothing that necessitates this thing be this way. I mean, if you put sugar into some water and you stick a string in there, right, there's things that necessitate. Chemical features, physical features that necessitate a crystal coming out of that is sugar. But when it comes to these information-bearing molecules in life, that is not at all the case. These things are reactive. When we mix stuff together, we get very mixed results as far as what they produce, and we've never been able to have anything produce something usable as far as the information. What we have is we have something that bears information, something that makes information usable, something that's encoded, and that something has no physical reason to exist the way that it does. That's what I'm saying to you. Right? So you have this incredible information-bearing capacity, information-using capacity, very specified, and the end result of it is functioning life, and we don't have any idea why the code exists. It wasn't forced, it wasn't necessitated, there's nothing that's there. So what does that mean? What did I say before? Whether you're looking at Gerhard Witt, or you're looking at Dembski, or some of the work of other information scientists, they all have come to this discovery is codes of this sort have no other source than intelligence. It's a whole basis, right? I said this the last time that we were together. Whole basis of SETI. Looking for patterns in information, in signals coming from outer space. Why? Well, because if you have usable information encoded, it always tells you what. Always without fail. Intelligence has produced this. Intelligence has produced this. And so that's what we have within the cells, within the interior of everything that is alive. Information that does amazing things and cannot have any other known source for development and execution than intelligence. Now, we have a good example, I think, hopefully that'll help you. If you don't understand what I'm saying yet, maybe this will help a little bit. We have an alphabet. And our alphabet is wonderful because we all learn it when we were, what, 3, 4, 5 years old, something like that. My little grandson now is singing back his alphabet to anyone who will listen. But alphabet is a wonderful invention. What is the purpose of an alphabet? Well, an alphabet is produced to bear information. But an alphabet in itself, is just a bunch of letters. What makes an alphabet actually useful is that you can put those letters in combinations. And if you have a convention for doing that, you can bear very specified, very useful, very detailed information. We call those things words. So it's a good thing to have an alphabet, but an alphabet won't get you to something that's useful. It takes the convention of words. You can translate words into letters, or translate ideas into letters. We call these things words. Those conventions are understood between those of us who must use these things. So when we read those words, we know how to do things. We can follow the instruction and get things done. That's what's going on in yourself. Now again, I said that it takes more faith to believe in atheism than it does in God. God is intelligent. God speaks. God knows how to use words. Stuff, on the other hand, my soups never talk to me, even alphabet soup. I mean, if I sat down to a bowl of alphabet soup and a message came floating to the top, I don't think that I would blame the alphabet soup. I would start looking around for an angel or a practical joker. Why? Intelligence, right? You know that intelligence is that source. It takes more faith to believe that you can look into a bowl of alphabet soup and have instructions to build living things than it does to understand that there's no practical joker out there, and that these things just didn't happen, but they were put in place by somebody with understanding and great intelligence. And that's I think the real crux of when it comes down to understanding this little proverb that we started off with. It is God's glory to conceal a thing. It was God's glory to put this fingerprint of himself into the smallest things, into the really tiny things, into the heart and soul of what makes things alive. It was God's glory to conceal his fingerprint even at that kind of a level. And it's been our glory as human beings and as the kings of science, as I've said, it's been our glory to kind of open up the package, take a look inside and see. And if you have sense, at least that's what it seems like to me, you'll see, oh, I see the fingerprints of God. And if you don't have sense, you'll look into it and say, oh, that doesn't show me anything other than chemicals do interesting things. I think that if you look at it with that kind of perspective and say, well, chemicals show me interesting things, I think you've gone and missed the thing that was meant to show you glory. The very thing that was meant to point to God, the very thing that was meant to cause you to look up and say, wow. The very thing that was meant to open your heart and to see that you have not made yourself, but you have been created by a masterful creator, by a all-knowing God. Then you are poorer, it seems to me, than the beggar on the street. And I think that we have, particularly in Western culture, but all across the world, we have this class of people, this apparently elite in intelligence, but blind to the glory of God, despite the fact that right before their faces, God has hid his glory so that they can find it and see it. I hope that none of us are in that place. I hope that none of us buy into the kinds of thoughts that we hear coming from those who, don't believe in God. They have no way to explain the genesis of life. They have no understanding about how life actually started. They have no way to explain the amazing machinery within the cell. They have no basis other than their just sheer determination not to believe in God. But if we do believe in God, we can look at those things and say, we are fearfully and wonderfully made. Amen. And that, friend, was the whole point of God making all of those things in the way that He did. I said earlier that I'm not aware of apologetics really ever getting a whole lot of people saved. I know of one in my personal experience who came to Christ as a result of apologetics, but I think that for the most part, apologetics isn't capable of doing that, getting a person to come to faith who didn't have faith before. But I do think that if you are a person who is open to faith, and I do think that if you are a person who's come to faith, I think apologetics can encourage you. I think it can settle you. It's pretty hard when people with all kinds of incredibly hard-to-get degrees tell you that you're a country bumpkin for believing in God. And it's kind of hard to hold out sometimes against the wave of unbelief that comes from them. But I say, don't get bowled over by a mere mortal who, when push comes down to shove, has a tougher position of explaining what it is that they believe on the basis of what they're using as so-called evidence than you have for explaining why you believe. Should you believe in God? Well, absolutely you should. I mean, you're pretty wonderful, are you not? How does wonder come out of stuff? It doesn't. Wonder comes out of wonder. And God, who is a wonder, has created you to display His wonder. And it behooves each and every one of us to look at the reality of that and say, bless the Lord, O my soul. And I trust that's what we'll do today and in the days to come.